Welcome, everyone. My name is Molly Hofer, and I am a family life educator with University of Illinois Extension. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Autumn Health Pick series. This is the 8th and final session of this series. I do work as an extension educator in Cook County, Illinois, in the Chicagoland area, and I do teach about aging issues in my role as an educator. So I am particularly happy to listen to this webinar today. Quite excited. This series is a collaboration between Illinois Extension and the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Institute at the University of Illinois. And it is designed to connect those across the state with researchers at the university and provide evidence-based educational programming. Before we begin, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. I am first going to launch a poll. This poll is to collect some basic information from our participants here on the call today. And once you enter your information, feel free to minimize it from the screen so it is off your screen. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind taking a second or two to fill out the poll. Also, if you are seeking CEUs or CPDUs, I just put a link into the chat box. You will need to fill out this form to check into today's webinar. And once you do that, you will receive a follow-up email with an evaluation that needs to be filled out to finalize the CEU CPDU process. So I put that in the chat box. I will also put it in again in a little bit. For those of you calling in who would like CEUs or CPDUs, you can go to a web browser and type in go.illinois.edu/credits. I'll say it again, go.illinois.edu/credits. That is the link for those of you who are calling in and want credit. If you have any questions during the program, please type them in the chat box. And I talked with Mickeal, our presenter today. We will take a look at those questions midway through the talk and at the end of the talk. So if you have questions, feel free to write them in. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Mickeal Key, our wonderful speaker today. Mickeal received a Bachelor of Science in both molecular and cellular biology and psychology. She earned a master's in experimental psychology, and she is currently a PhD student in the neuroscience program here at the University of Illinois, where her primary research investigates how diet and other lifestyle factors impact brain health and cognitive aging. Today, she'll be talking to us about staying sharp by maintaining brain health as we age. So I will now turn it over to Mickeal. Mickeal, are you unmuted?
Oh, there we go. So I was having a hard time switching back from the laser pointer to the actual clicking on icons. Thank you so much, Molly. I appreciate that introduction and kind of setting us up for how we're going to work today. Thank you all for joining us. I'm so glad to be talking with you all and kind of rounding out this awesome series that we've had this fall. So thanks so much for sticking with us and tuning in. And so let's go ahead and get into to the talk today. So, you know, as Molly mentioned, I got my master's in experimental psychology at Indiana State University. But it wasn't until after that I really got a chance to do research in the cognitive aging field. So I was actually a clinical research tech at Indiana University Health. worked here at this really cool building, the Neuroscience Center, where I worked with a clinical psychologist that was trying to, create an intervention, a multimodal intervention to assist older adults with maintaining their brain and cognitive health over time. So that was really the first time I got to actually sink my teeth into this type of research that is really kind of near and dear to me. And so after that position, I decided that, I wanted to continue with my studies. And so that's how I got here at University of Illinois in the neuroscience program, where I'm actually able to continue on in that research interest of mine. So like I mentioned, cognitive aging is in general my field, where I just want to understand how we age over time, and in particular, how our cognition changes over time, how our brain changes, and possibly how we could, institute preventative measures to make sure that we can age gracefully. So another, realm that I have more recently gotten into is nutritional cognitive neuroscience. So that's specifically looking at how nutrition can support brain and cognitive function. And also, as I've delved into this area, there are many disparities, health disparities, particularly in aging. So we know that there are health disparities across the lifespan, but when you talk about aging in particular, you kind of see an accumulation of those health disparities and how the aging process and diseases related to the aging process can kind of compound for minority communities. So that is another research area that I'm interested in as well. But today we're going to talk about cognitive aging, how our brain changes kind of over time, and some evidence-based interventions that could possibly help us to preserve our brain and therefore preserve our cognitive function as we get older. One thing I would, or a couple of things I'd like to note before we get into the nitty gritty of our talk, is that I am a scientist, but I'm not a physician. And in particular, I'm not your physician. And so while there might be some really interesting things that you would want to implement in your life, to help you with your, aging process, any preventative measures that you might think that you want to implement into your lifestyle, it's really important that you consult your own healthcare team concerning any of those lifestyle changes you might be considering, especially when it comes to diet and exercise. A lot of these things can change based on your mobility, based on medications that you're taking, and things of that nature. And so it's really important that, you take this information and this knowledge and have a conversation with your healthcare team, whether that's your primary care physician, whether that's your dietitian, your physical therapist, anyone on your healthcare team you'd want to take this information to before you implement it in terms of changes in your lifestyle. All right, so kind of to get us going in the chat, I thought we could talk about positive aspects of the aging process. So, of course, we're talking about, ways in which we can prevent some of these, more these negative kind of aspects of the aging process, but I thought we would start off talking about the positive things. What are some good things about aging and getting older? I think it's funny that I say this because today is actually my birthday. So I'm also getting older, coming to terms with my, youth. It feels like it's slipping away. But yeah, I see some really nice things, grandkids and wisdom, confidence, yes, money and better jobs, for sure. Yeah, understanding what really matters. Yes, senior discounts. Yes, for sure, for sure. Yeah, free time. Yeah, this is great. family. Yes. Oh, thank you all for the for the happy birthday. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. So these are some really, really great things that happen as we age, and so I kind of want to just put this in context. Because we're talking about health, and unfortunately, age is the most significant kind of risk factor in terms of declining health. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of us in the research field and in the medical field trying to, change that, as our lifespans, grow and our expected, our life expectancies continue to increase. It would be great that that entire lifespan, that entire, life expectancy is one of good health, one where we can contribute to our families and society, and that it's not one of sickness or disease. So I think that's what we're really trying to get at here. So yeah, so thanks so much for participating and kind of chiming in with those aspects. But I'm loving all of those, loving all of those. Okay, so when we talk about brain health, what are we really talking about, right? So on one hand, I think there's two kind of major factors or domains that we talk about. On one hand, we're talking about our brain structure and how it functions. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, how that changes as we age. And we're talking about like healthy aging as well. I guess I should, put that as a caveat as well. When we're talking about disease, you're kind of talking about something kind of outside of the norm. And so we're really talking about kind of healthy aging. So there are changes that happen in healthy aging to our brain structure and function. But we're also talking about like, what is that real world impact, right? Most of us are not going to be able to see like an MRI image of our brain, right? Actually, as closely as I work with imaging, I don't even have a scan of my own brain. So most of us aren't going to actually be able to see those physical changes, but what we will notice is our cognitive performance. And so, so that's the other kind of function. So, are we maintaining cognitive function, cognitive performance, so that we're able to continue to engage and interact with our environment like we have been throughout our lifespan? So those are the kind of the two domains I'm breaking them up in for this presentation. So let's start with brain structure and function. Okay, so there are lots, just to be upfront, there are lots of different ways in which researchers kind of conceptualize brain structure. So many different research approaches to look at how the structure of the brain changes. And a few of the main ones that you might hear about are volume. So how the actual like physical space that your brain is taking up. A lot of times researchers will look at the integrity of white matter tracks. So an example of that is this image. The brain on the left is what we call a DTI scan, or a diffuser tensor imaging scan, where you can look at the white matter tracks, which are those axons that are spreading the length either up and down, or left to right, or back to forward throughout the brain. And so the integrity of those matter tracks are some of those, a characteristic of brain structure that we can talk about in terms of disease or in terms of aging. Network efficiency, so how well is your brain able to communicate, whether that's across the brain with other regions or within a particular network. And then network connectivity, the actual connections from one region of the brain to the other is also a factor that we can talk about when we talk about brain structure. So I think it's important to note that when we talk about these changes that are happening in the brain, they are not uniform. So they're not happening the same across the brain. And an example of that, so if we go back to talking about brain volume, most the regions that are most affected by the aging process are the frontal regions, and then the more medial temporal regions that include like the hippocampus. Those are the ones that are most susceptible to aging, where you're going to see the most changes, where there are other regions like, for example, the occipital lobe that are, for the most part, preserved in terms of volume when we talk about the aging process. Another kind of nuanced uh, characteristic that I like to bring up is that while there is a loss of cells, so when we're talking about volume, we are talking about loss of cells or neurons in this case, which you might have heard in maybe some more medical leaning literature called atrophy, right? So that is a loss of cells and neurons, which decreases volume. But it's also important to note that these changes also come with the loss of dendritic spines. And so I have this image over here to the right that's showing you, like a cartoon version of a neuron. And so you see here, um, let me get my pen here. So you see here, we have the axon of the neuron here, and then we have the dendrites. And so, like I mentioned, what we're losing a lot of times are these dendritic spines. So there's these little knobs along the dendrite. And why these are important is because your brain basically is functioning on synapses. And synapses, which you as a refresher, is this kind of micro environment where a lot of the communication is happening from one neuron to another. And so if you're losing these key communication sites, then you're going to see kind of functional changes. So in this case, you're seeing structural changes. So fewer of these physical dendritic spines, leading to a functional change. So changes in how well this particular neuron is able to communicate with all of the other neurons around it. Um, so that's one that I wanted to kind of point out as well, that might not get talked about as much as maybe some of these other changes that we hear. Again, kind of building a little bit more into this functional aspect of our brain and how that can change with age, is looking at the actual neurotransmitters, right? So I'm sure you guys have all heard of neurotransmitters, but just as a kind of a brief description of them, they're essentially these molecules that serve as a chemical signal. So they're this chemical communication throughout the nervous system, that are really key to getting those signals across and making sure that our cognitive function kind of stays intact. And so just listing these different functions, is not meant to get too much into detail about this, but really just to explain that these chemicals are super important because they essentially moderate the electrical excitability of our neurons. So it's a really key part of our communication that's happening in the brain. And so these systems can also be disrupted in aging. So, for example, one of our main neurotransmitters, which is acetylcholine, is considered a cholinergic um, molecule. And so our cholinergic system, as we age, degrades and is not as efficient as it was, previously. So That's one example of how kind of this neurotransmitter system can change as we age, and how that might lead to cognitive uh, a degradation of our cognitive function over time. Okay, and so again, to get another way that we can look at our brain function is how well, essentially, different brain regions talk to each other. So in this example, so I have this image. If you look at image B, you have a list of all the different brain regions, both right and left. So, looking at both hemispheres, how they communicate with other brain regions. So you could think of functional connectivity as one region, communicating with another. You also look at how different networks. So there many times you have brain regions that kind of all work together to complete a certain task. So let's say attention. You have a certain set of brain regions that are normally activated when attentional processes or attentional functions are needed, right? You can also think of how, so let's say the attentional network might work with another network of brain regions. And so there are some different levels that functional connectivity can kind of be analyzed in. When it comes to aging, some of those changes, when we talk about networks, can either be a decreased network efficiency. So we're talking about within one network. So I have this image over to the left. Let's just take the green network as an example. So we could talk about how overall, aging results in a decreased network efficiency. So that's how well information is being passed within a particular network. There's also changes related to network connectivity. So not necessarily like how well information is being processed, but this is how well regions within a network are connected to each other. So like I said, if we take attention, for example, if you have a set of brain regions that are normally connected to fulfill that particular, so we're talking about attentional processes, then we're normally seeing a decrease in within network connectivity. So those brain regions that are supposed to be connected and working together, there's there's degradation in that network. And so of course, which can cause issues in terms of decreased cognitive performance, and in this case, decreased attentional performance. It's kind of on the opposite side of that. With aging, we see an increase actually in between network connectivity. And so maybe in the next couple of slides, this will make a little bit more sense, but essentially what you're seeing is that, you know, the aging brain is trying to make more connections to other parts of the brain. And in many times, like I said before, we'll talk about a little bit later, this is in a compensatory type of manner. So maybe you might have atrophy or decreased connectivity in a particular region. Your brain will recruit resources from other parts of the brain that it didn't do before to help maintain that cognitive function. And so that's why you might see a decrease within a particular network, but you see increases between networks. Again, many are thinking that this is in a compensatory manner, trying to make up for lost resources within a network, and so looking to other networks for assistance, essentially. All right, and so then the second domain, or that second function, that we mentioned a little bit earlier is cognitive performance, right? So while there are definitely improvements, which again, I was trying to kind of frame this as while there are declines, there are also improvements. You do have, improvements in autobiographical memory. So you're not necessarily as you age, and you all can, tell this just from just a little test. You're probably going to remember, you know, the day of your wedding or where you were, during 9/11, or maybe your childhood home, something of that nature. So you're not going to see declines in that type of memory. You're also not going to see declines in your knowledge essentially about the world or skills that you've developed over your lifespan. And so if you look at this graph here presented in the middle, where you have age and years presented on the x-axis, and you have scores represented on the y-axis, you see that performance for essentially your world knowledge, what facts, things about yourself, the world around you, are pretty much increasing over your lifespan, and only kind of start to degrade in much later life. Whereas there are, other cognitive measures that kind of start, if you see our graph starts at your 20s, kind of start declining steadily over your lifespan. And those are, aspects like working memory, which is essentially your capacity to hold. It's like a cognitive system that has this limited capacity, and it holds information temporarily. And you normally use working memory when you're trying to solve a problem, or when you're trying to hold something in short-term memory. So that normally is declining over age. Long-term memory, so the ability to take those short-term memories and convert them into long-term memories. Problem solving and decision making is something that also decreases as we age. And then attention and our processing speed. So how fast we're able to make those cognitive calculations can decrease with age over time as well. I thought something that would help to unify, to kind of connect, all of these changes in both function and cognition would be to share just one of many theories for cognitive aging. And this particular one is called the scaffolding theory of aging and cognition. And so again, it tries to take in the information from the literature to kind of make sense of what we are seeing in terms of cognitive function and how that relates to our brain health. So you start with the aging process. As we've kind of already outlined, the aging process leads to neural changes. So changes with how our neurons are working and operating, but it also relates to these functional declines. And so these two changes are related. So what our brain ends up doing when it has all of this functional and structural changes, it tries to compensate. So again, the idea is it's trying to maintain the functions that it needs to do, whether that is with working memory, whether that's with attention. It's trying to maintain working memory. It's trying to maintain attention. So it will kind of kickstart these compensatory changes, or these compensatory mechanisms, which some of them I kind of already mentioned. So if you're having declines in maybe one area, so let's say attention, that your brain might kind of recruit resources from another part of the brain. So that could be a whole different network, that your brain isn't normally used to tapping into, but it's tapping into it now to preserve cognitive function. And it could be a bilateral recruitment of brain resources. So whereas maybe um, um, in younger in your and in maybe your youth, right, you used maybe just the right hemisphere, a particular brain region in the right hemisphere, and into aging, your brain might then recruit that same brain region, but also from the left, and that's called bilateral activation. So whereas maybe it only activated one side or the other before aging, as we get older, it might recruit both of those regions again to try to maintain cognitive function over time. So these are compensatory mechanisms. And again, all related to trying to maintain cognitive function over time. So this is just one, and like I said, there are many other theories, again, that are essentially just trying to take what we're finding in the literature to make sense of what we're seeing. And one major reason for even coming up with theories like this is we want to change it, right? Like I said in the beginning, we are really looking for ways in which we can we might not be able to completely bypass this process, right? But maybe there are ways that we can improve it, right? So that our cognitive function is maintained over a longer period of time, possibly even kind of sidestepping diseases or disorders like dementia in the process. But once you come up with a theory like the scaffolding theory, then you can kind of start thinking about, well, what part of this chain, what part of this process could we intervene in, and or institute some type of intervention to help. And for the scaffolding theory, the kind of link we are aiming for, this theory is aiming for, is the compensatory changes, trying to kind of solidify and hold up those compensatory mechanisms so that they're more they're reinforced, right? And they're able to do their job a little bit better. And so in this theory, scaffolding enhancements can include exercise and other kind of evidence-based interventions. And so this theory was developed in 2009. And so lots of research, in this area has kind of emerged as ways to, again, support brain health in ways that help to preserve cognitive function. And so we're going to talk about some of those more updated interventions and evidence-based interventions for the second half of our talk. So before we go on, I think this would be a good place to break for questions, I think, Molly.
Okay, Mickeal, I think there are two and they're related.
Okay.
One person asks about meds advertised on TV, for example, jellyfish, and the related question asks about medically recognized supplements proven to address cognitive changes due to aging.
Yes. Oh, yes. Those are very good questions because, we do have a population, not just in the US, that is a large population that is aging, but also worldwide. So there are lots of people that I know are concerned about these changes. And so we will definitely talk about this. Actually, the second half of the presentation is going to address this. So both of those questions will be addressed. I think maybe after the information is presented, it's definitely going to answer those questions, but we can talk about it if you have follow-up questions. But we're definitely going to address the jellyfish pill and other like supplements aimed at improving cognitive function.
Terrific. I think that's all I see for now, Mickeal.
Okay, great. Okay, so these evidence-based interventions, there's essentially four that I've grouped them into. Again, this is from the research literature, and these are going to be based on clinical trials or yeah, these are going to be based on clinical trials or intervention that actually try to get at, how we can possibly move the needle, right, towards more preserved cognition as well as brain function. And so those four main areas are exercise, which we've heard a lot about in a previous seminar in this series. Nutrition, which again we've definitely heard a lot of great things from researchers in this series as well as in the summer series, which you guys are free to kind of look back at and view. We're going to talk a little bit about sleep, which sometimes gets overlooked as a lifestyle kind of factor. And then we're going to talk about mental engagement. So things that we can do that might improve our cognition. So those are the four main areas we're going to talk about in the remaining slides for this talk. So let's start with exercise. So like I mentioned, there was a great presentation a little bit earlier in this series about how physical fitness, guidelines for physical fitness and how that improves your health. In particular, when it comes to our brains and when it comes to our brains and aging, their fitness training interventions have revealed quite a bit. One of those is that physical fitness is related to decreased age-related brain atrophy, right? So we talked about brain atrophy earlier. Physical fitness is related to decreased age-related brain atrophy, and specifically, which is great news, specifically for areas that are most susceptible to the aging process. So again, those are those frontal regions of the brain that are normally related to our executive functioning, right? So our problem solving, decision-making processes, and then the medial temporal regions, which normally are including the hippocampus, they're finding benefits from fitness training for these brain regions, which is great news, right? We also see improvements, which related to the previous point. We're also seeing improvements in functional connectivity of the frontal parietal connections. And so again, the really nice thing that this research is showing is that also translates to improved working memory performance. So again, like I talked about a little bit earlier, our working memory is how we hold information temporarily to essentially work with it. So whether that's decision making, whether that's our short-term memory, this is really good in terms of supporting cognitive function. When we talk about mechanisms for how exercise is conferring all of these benefits that we see, it's important to note that, along with the neurons, along with, the neurotransmitters, the brain is a highly vascularized organ, right? And so I have an image up to the right in case you haven't seen an image like this before. You have very intricate small vessels that are running throughout the brain. It also shows you those larger arteries. And so if you have ever, attended, a stroke talk or anything like that, that a lot of those very small, intricate, blood vessels are involved in things like strokes and whatnot, blockages in those types of vessels. So the brain is highly vascularized. And so what they're finding in these fitness training interventions is that you have this improved cardiovascular health. And so when your cardiovascular system is healthy, then that shows improvements throughout the body, including the brain. The they also see that physical fitness is impacting the brain on a molecular level. So these bioenergetic challenges that you're getting when you increase your activity level is activating intracellular signaling that's going to aid your neurons in resisting things, many things, including oxidative stress. And you've probably heard of oxidative stress when we talk about inflammation, right? So oxidative stress is something that harms and damages cells. And so they're seeing that this signaling initiated by physical fitness is kind of giving your neurons a boost and helping them to resist that oxidative stress. We're seeing physical fitness improving metabolism, cell metabolism. So again, the more healthy and robust your brain cells are, the better they are able to do their job and the better they're able to function. Because also remember that the brain requires a lot of energy, right? So improving cell metabolism is key. And also they find that physical fitness is modifying epigenetic regulation of neural genes. So essentially, this is just saying that your neurons have genes that they express. They are creating different proteins needed for your brain to function. Epigenetic regulation, basically that's just saying that your environment, so anything you expose your neurons to, can possibly change the genetic makeup and genetic expression of different proteins. And so physical fitness has been found to modify the epigenetic regulation on the side of improving those neural genes that are being expressed, so that you're getting, the proteins that you need for your brain to function. So these are some of the mechanisms that have been highlighted in how exercise is bringing up these great beneficial effects for the brain and cognition. Nutrition is the next factor that we can talk about. So again, we've talked about at length, I think, in this series and in previous series about the importance of nutrition, not just to stave off disease, but there's just basic things that our body can't necessarily make itself and that our body needs from the foods that we eat. And so I thought I might talk about some of the primary roles that nutrition can play. So they here I'm just showing you that you can get dietary neurotransmitters. So in your diet, you can get these things like acetylcholine and glutamate that also function as neurotransmitters. You can get from your diet neurotransmitter precursors. So essentially you're getting the building blocks like different amino acids that later on are used in metabolic processes in your brain to create neurotransmitters later on down the road because your brain makes them as they need them. So you're getting the building blocks through your nutrition. And also you have different nutrients that you intake that just support neurotransmission and synapse function. So again, the synapse is that key kind of communication microenvironment where nutrition can aid in kind of protecting and sustaining synapse function. So I gave you a couple of pictures over to the side just to explain a couple of these. So if you look here in the middle, you have this beautiful bowl of roasted eggplant and spinach. So there you're getting your acetylcholine and glutamate. You might as well put a little side of strawberries in there to go along with it. Your omega-3 fatty acids and choline So you can get that all from a nice pan-seared salmon. And you can get magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin D, and selenium. So that's quite a few vitamins and minerals you can get from a beautiful shrimp and mushroom Alfredo. I don't know if you can tell, but I love food, guys. And so, just in some of these dishes that I'm just showing here, you can get some of these dietary um, neurotransmitters that are really supporting everything from learning and memory to your mood and motivation. And again, basic things like glucose, right? Like I mentioned before, your brain primary source of energy is to break down glucose. So these are some of the primary roles that I'm calling primary roles that nutrition can play in supporting your brain health. Some supporting roles, we can kind of refer to these vitamins and minerals like selenium, vitamin E, and these vitamins, and there's quite a long list of them, but these vitamins and minerals are seen as anti-inflammatory agents, which can preserve, brain structures. And so here are just a few different foods that I've kind of shown you that are are packed with lots of these different vitamins and minerals that are considered anti-inflammatory. So give me some multicolored, sweet, bell peppers. Avocado is amazing, and then your dark leafy greens are really important for this role as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of overlap where you have lots of different foods can give you, can provide a source of lots of different vitamins and minerals. So we're not just talking about, like one or two vitamins that these foods are supplying you. They're supplying you quite a few. So even though we have been talking about some individual foods and we've been talking about individual vitamins and minerals that are related to our cognitive function, really the literature, the research, the state of the art research is calling for whole diets. So looking at taking a holistic view and looking at the whole diet to support brain function and and cognitive performance. So in that interest, I thought I would talk about a couple of diets that have been used in intervention trials. So these are clinical trials we're talking about. One of those that has been supported for a while is the Mediterranean diet. And I'm sure you all have heard of this diet, but just an overview, the basis of this diet is to eat lots of colorful fruits and vegetables and whole grains. The emphasis on essentially the meat that you eat is through fish and seafood. And then this Mediterranean diet kind of discourages like red meats and sweets, but it also encourages red wine as a function of this diet, as well as social engagement. So this is one of the diets that has probably one of the most support in terms of a whole diet that can support your brain health. Another one that was implemented in 2015 and has really seen takeoff is the MIND diet. And so the MIND diet is actually a combination of the Mediterranean diet, and you guys may have also heard of the DASH diet, used for individuals who are needing assistance with cardiovascular health. And so the MIND diet stands for the Mediterranean Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. And so again, this is a diet that has been used um, in intervention trials to see if it could help to delay decreases in cognitive function over time. And so they have definitely seen this diet decrease the risk for cognitive decline. And so the basis of this diet is, again, whole grains and eating lots of dark leafy vegetables. In the fruit kind of realm, the focus is on berries. So not necessarily all fruit, but for this diet, the focus is on increasing your consumption of berries, eating at least 1 ounce of a 1 ounce serving of nuts each day. So that's a lot, and maybe more than I eat actually. And then the emphasis on meat is poultry and fish. This diet also includes wine and wants you to decrease your amount of fat, especially in terms of butter and margarine. The suggestion for this diet is to use olive oil as your main cooking fat and to decrease your amount of fried food, dairy, and sweets. So those are two, again, like I said, whole diets that are supported by intervention data in the literature. And so so to get at some of the questions that were posed before, when we talk about supplements, one thing that is important to state, well, first, let's say, when you talk about supplements, the idea that they would help you be above and beyond what you're already intaking really does depend on your nutrient status, right? So if you go to your doctor and your doctor does a blood panel and they see that you're low in magnesium or something, right? And that those levels are lower than, the average range that they should be. Then of course, taking a magnesium supplement, then putting you in normal range. Of course, your doctor is telling you that because they think that that would help. There is not a whole lot of research looking at if that supplement would help you above and beyond if you're already in the normal range, right? So when we talk about taking supplements, it really does depend on your nutrient status. And the idea is that there's really just not a lot of intervention data that's out to support that some of these supplements are actually going to help. Like I mentioned earlier, we know that, vitamin E is a great antioxidant, right? So it seems like taking a vitamin E supplement would confer anti-inflammatory properties and improve your inflammation status overall, right? But unfortunately, all of the intervention trials for just taking a vitamin E supplement have not supported that taking a vitamin E supplement would be helpful, right? And vitamin E is just one of many supplements. The other issue with supplements is that the supplement industry is not regulated like the drug industry. So when you're taking a supplement, you actually don't really know what you are getting. Of course, there are agencies that try to certify these, but that's more about quality, not necessarily about function. And if it's actually going to have the impact that you're expecting it to have. Again, the evidence-based research is supporting whole diets, improving cognitive and brain function over time, but not necessarily these single nutrients or these single kind of supplements. So most of the time, the intervention and clinical trials are not supporting these supplements for doing what they say that they're going to do. And in particular, I know one of the questions was about the jellyfish kind of supplement. And so again, if you know, kind of take a look, you'll see that the FDA actually really had to come down on like the maker of Prevagen, which is that supplement that you know, has the compound made from jellyfish, because the evidence just does not support that that compound is going to improve um, or prevent, you know, dementia like it says that it would. And in fact, research is really showing that that compound most likely gets degraded in the stomach before it's even able to have any kind of effect. So research intervention trials from, you know, trusted sources really aren't supporting the claims that that particular supplement is making. I think, and so I think that's about, I think that's about it for that one. So yeah, so that is kind of summing up our talk about nutrition. So the last factor in our evidence-based intervention kind of survey is looking at mental engagement. So when we talk about mental engagement, this really brings up the research concept of cognitive reserve, and that is illustrated here to the right in this graph. So you have neuropathology, so essentially changes in the brain that lead to decreased cognition. And you have cognition, so your cognitive performance here on the y-axis. And so the idea of cognitive reserve is that individuals that have this high cognitive reserve are going to essentially age their cognition is going to be maintained over time longer than those with low cognitive reserve. So the idea is that a person with low cognitive reserve might see declines in their cognition over time earlier, right? In time, based on the neuropathology that's being presented in their brain versus a person with high cognitive reserve. So the idea is that this high cognitive reserve is buffering them. So where they're still progressing and maybe neuropathology or changes in their brain that should lead to lower cognition, but they're not experiencing lower cognition, not until much later in time. And the idea is that cognitive reserve is something that you've kind of built up over time that's either productive your brain or changing the way that your brain processes information so that that neuropathology does not actually affect how well you perform cognitively. And so the research has pointed to a couple of different things in terms of mental engagement, things that you can do now, right, to help kind of build up this cognitive reserve. So education is one of the main, you know, indicators of cognitive reserve. So individuals who continue their education, you know, in this case, this is formal education, tend to have higher cognitive reserve. But formal education is not the end of it, right? So there is research supporting learning a new language. So bilingualism, just learning a second language. So bilingualism can be tied to improvements in cognitive reserve and improvements in cognition over time. Just any kind of new skill acquisition, and even social engagement. Can all be factors related to mental engagement that can help improve, you know, your chances of preserving your cognition over time. And so these are all things that you can do, that you can kind of do now, that it's not necessarily kind of like a lost cause kind of deal. Oh, and I apologize. I went in the wrong direction. Okay, there was one more. We have sleep. And so sleep is, I don't know if that's funny or not that I overlooked it, but sometimes it is overlooked. In terms of the power that it has to help us in terms of cognitive aging. So as we age, there are normally disturbances in sleep that cause us to have poor sleep as we age. And so what researchers have found is that these changes, like I mentioned earlier, in particular, changes in these frontal regions related to aging are reducing the slow wave brain activity during sleep. And this slow wave brain activity is actually, critical to our long-term memory. So what you see is that in older adults, you have this reduced slow wave brain activity during sleep, and then that is connected then to, declines in long-term memory. And that's kind of what this chart over to the right is showing you. So just to orient you, this is memory retention, both short delay, so that's kind of mimicking short-term memory, and then long delay, which is showing more long-term memory. You have your younger adults here in red, and you have your older adults here in blue. And so what you're seeing is that this decrease in this slow wave brain activity is resulting in lower memory retention in older adults versus young adults. And so, whereas you might not be able to implement some type of sleep intervention to, remedy cognitive issues if you're having them already, longitudinal studies, so studies that look at least two different time points, suggests that maintaining good sleep quality, so starting now, throughout the lifespan, including middle age, can help to preserve cognitive performance into old age. So when we talk about sleep quality, that's like getting a good number of hours of sleep, doing what you can to, stay asleep, and not have too many sleep interruptions. And so that's something that kind of, again, like I said, builds up throughout your lifespan, but could definitely, changing your quality of sleep and the amount of sleep that you're getting even in middle age can show improvements later on in life. So I realize we're at 103 right now. So thank you for bearing with me, you all. The takeaways that I hope that you get from this talk is that, what's happening, your brain is changing, right? It's not, uniform over the brain. But it's changing in terms of its structure and its ability to relay information. And so this translates into maybe increases in performance on cognitive tasks for some and declines in others. But if you take a holistic approach to your health in general, which is kind of attested to in looking at the exercise, nutrition, sleep, and mental engagement, all being important in preserving cognitive function. You can do what you can to maintain your brain health and cognitive function as you age. So I think with that, we can have questions, but I do want to make sure that I put this up for you to take the survey. And we will have a spring series, so information is coming up on that soon. So stay tuned for more great talks in the spring. But I'll take questions now, Molly.
Okay, thanks, Mickeal. If you would like to hang on to for the Q&A part of this, we would love for you to stay. Chelsea and I both put the evaluation link also in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind filling it out, your feedback is really valuable to us. And Mickeal did mention we will have another series in the spring. So in that survey, you will also be asked about topics that you're interested in for our Illinois researchers to cover in the future. So please fill that in. We really appreciate it. With that said, the first question I have for you, Mickeal, came in as a direct message. How do you add dendrites?
Oh, that's a good question. um, so part of I don't have a straightforward answer for that question. That's a really good question. But I will say part of the when your brain decides that it needs more dendrites, part of that is genetic.
Okay.
So not necessarily this in the genetic in the sense that maybe we normally think. It kind of ties back into that concept I was talking about earlier, epigenetics, where your environment can change genetic regulation. And so, you have genes that will turn on and turn off, and they'll turn on and say, hey, make me some more dendrites. And they might turn off and say, hey, I have enough. That's really simplistic. I'm sorry. But in general, that's kind of how a gene that regulates, dendritic growth might work. And so, so part of it, I'll say that to say that part of it is genetic, and that can change with age. But I will write that down, and I will look that up exactly if there are other ways in which you could prompt or prod your brain to make. But I'm thinking it's mostly kind of genetic, and your brain decides, your DNA kind of has this on off, do I need them, do I not kind of deal, and that's controlled by your genetic and epigenetic factors.
Okay, terrific. Are there specific exercise we should engage in for brain health?
Yeah, so I would point you guys back to the exercise seminar that was maybe towards the end of October, I think, for more information on kind of exercises that you would do. Most of the studies that I was talking about are more aerobic types of exercise. So we're talking about like walking, running, that kind of deal. So most of the exercises were kind of aerobic exercises, but for a really nice detailed kind of survey of exercises you can do for your health is in a previous seminar that I would point you to.
Very good. I'm glad you did that, because Chelsea also put that link in the chat box for anyone who would like to listen to or view a previously recorded webinar. You just click on that link. Okay. Can any of the negative problems, such as oxidative stress and other declines, be reversed by exercise or other interventions, or is it just keeping the brain from getting worse?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think what we're working on is just keeping it from getting worse, right? So of course, the earlier you can implement changes, positive changes to your like I mentioned, overall health, the better. And that's more of the preventative stage. We're not, we're not quite in the realm yet to reverse changes that have already happened. So mostly what you're doing is kind of slowing down what's happening. You're basically kind of slowing down how fast that damage happens, more than reversing those kind of things. So.
And this might be a similar question. Is there still degeneration in a healthy aging brain?
Yes. Yeah. So in a healthy aging brain, and that's what we were kind of focusing on, because if this were a dementia talk, or if this were an Alzheimer's talk, then we would be talking about very different things, and a very different kind of prognosis for how that decline is happening. So this was kind of focused on, this is what's happening in a healthy aging person. You're going to have those changes. But again, the healthier your lifestyle is over your lifespan, it's, I think in the field, we're seeing that as pushing those issues further down the line, right? So again, we're not, I don't think anyone's saying that we're stopping anything from happening, but we're slowing it down so that you don't actually have or see the effects until much later in life.
Just as with the body, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. It's got to show a little wear and tear, right?
That's right.
You've
'Cause
been alive and you've been,
right, because we've
kicking.
lived a
And
life.
yes, you lived a great life, and
Mhm.
there should be a little show, right?
Exactly. How about diverse diet? Is it sufficient as we age, or do we need supplements?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I really think that that's one of those things that you would have to talk to your doctor about.
Mhm.
Because these holistic diets, so when we're talking about the Mediterranean diet or we're talking about the Mayan diet, they really are encouraging you to eat from a lot of different food groups, eating like, Corinne had a great talk earlier in this series about eating the rainbow, right? Eating a variety of foods and eating different colorful foods, right? Impart different nutrient groups. And so a lot of these diets really are asking you to kind of diversify your diet and eat different things. But in terms of supplements, that's really going to be, if you need something above and beyond your diet, that's definitely something you would
Mhm.
talk to your doctor about.
And as you said, can be decided through a blood workup.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yes.
Is dementia a normal destination for the brain that runs out of cognitive reserve?
Say that one more. Is
Is
dementia?
dementia a normal destination, or, is that the ultimate
Oh,
happening if the brain runs out of cognitive
oh,
reserve?
yeah. No, dementia. Um, that's a good question. In my opinion, dementia is a disease, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm going to say that that's not part of healthy aging.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so I think that's where most of the field kind of stands, that dementia is a disease. You don't expect, like, just like with heart disease, right? Like, you don't expect to get heart disease, but if you're not doing things to protect your cardiovascular health, then that damage kind of adds up and you have issues, right? And I think we can think of the brain in the same way, is that yes, there are going to be changes. Yes, um, there's going to be some damage, but dementia really is a disorder or a disease, and I don't think we should think of that as
Mhm.
normal aging.
Excellent analogy.
Mhm.
Is there any evidence that brain games such as Sudoku help?
Oh, Sudoku. Well, I will say off the top, unfortunately, intervention trials aren't really supporting the quintessential kind of brain games. So as much as we would love for those, that software and like games and stuff you can download to work, the evidence really isn't supporting that they're making a difference. What we're showing is that yes, you can get better at the game and improve on those specific skills, but those, I think the idea is that we would want that training to then translate to other parts of your life. Like, is training on this game going to make me a more observant driver or something
Mhm.
like that, right?
Mhm.
Or a more observant or a better problem solver? And we're not seeing that translation. So
Mhm.
while you might get better at the game, faster at the game, even, research doesn't support that training on those games then translates to like real life increases in performance.
Sure.
So we're not
Got
quite
it.
there yet.
Two more quick questions. First, what about water? Does it help, drinking water?
Oh, I would say always water.
Mm-hmm.
I would say always water. Staying hydrated is always a good thing. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I feel like staying hydrated is up there with sleep. But I'm gonna be honest, I haven't actually looked at any like intervention studies that said like a hydrated person does this and a
Mm-hmm.
non-hydrated person. But if you think about it, because water is so important to different molecular processes that are going in your body, it's going to help your brain as well.
Sure,
So,
sure,
so water
absolutely.
is super important to making sure your body runs like it's supposed to. So I say yes, staying
Okay,
hydrated is important.
wonderful. And lastly, do you have a book or books that you would recommend on the
Oh,
topic?
I don't actually. I mean, I know there are certain books out there, like maybe on like these, like some of the diets that I've talked about. Maybe if you're more interested in how, after you've talked to your doctor about how you would change your diet, if that's something you're interested in, then there are definitely books on these topics so that you can make that lifestyle change easier. But I don't think I had, that's a really good question, but I think I would like to look into that, and maybe I might have some suggestions a little bit later, but
Yeah, you can always add it to the website, to your under
yeah,
your section,
that's
sure.
a really good question though.
Terrific. And the other comments are really just wishing you a wonderful day on your birthday. So,
Ah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
all right. So I believe if there isn't anything else, we will close out this webinar session. Again, thank you for those of you who remained to listen to the Q&A. And please fill out your evaluation survey if you have not done so already. So thank you all.
Thanks everyone.